During the general election, probably the most upsetting thing that I saw, I was watching TV, probably waiting to see an interview that I'd done to see how it went. And there was a police officer in, I think, Bedford, who was top walking along the streets, and he was saying, my vision is to have a CCTV camera on 1 in 3 houses so that we can stop all the crime. That got me back out on the doorsteps to make sure that didn't happen. These sorts of issues have been things which have bothered me for a while. It's great to see familiar faces, both from the civil liberties perspective, but also from fights against things like the Digital Economy Act, and there are faces I see from some of that. And this whole idea about what's going to happen with data, etc., is something that's bothered me for a long time. So I asked, I think it was my second Prime Minister's question in October 2010, and I asked David Cameron, I think Gus showed the answer to my question, where the Prime Minister said there wouldn't be a centralised database. I did then follow that up with a question about what about local ones, and didn't get a very thorough response to that. I think there are a few fundamental problems which mean that this is going to keep being a problem. And one of them Ross has already touched on, which is the fact that most people making policy don't get it. They simply don't understand. And that's true for the vast majority of politicians. That's also true for the vast majority of special advisors, civil servants, pretty much at every single level. And so when they say, but a phone call is quite a lot like a Skype call, just expand it, there isn't any step which then says, but hang on, are there any differences that might matter? Technically, leaving aside for a second the civil liberties aspects. And that is a huge fundamental problem, that they don't understand what they're trying to do and can be manipulated by people who do. There's another huge problem, which is something which I think was brought in by the last government, somebody may correct me, which is actually to do with appointments. Having the head of the Office of Security and Counter-Terrorism as a serving MI5 officer.
6.
Is he 6? I've heard 5 from other sources, but you know, you may well be right. But from a serving spook means that there is a vested interest there in providing what the spooks would like to see. It is absolutely essential that that key policy job within the Home Office is providing advice in the interests of the people of the country, not in the interests of the security services. That is absolutely essential. And Charles Farr, who's a very interesting character, controls a huge budget, very, very important. When he comes to give evidence to the Home Affairs Select Committee, everybody else is thrown out of the room and anything he says is redacted. This is a senior civil servant who should be accountable to the public through, as well as being through the Home Secretary. That is a huge problem. That is something which we have to stop. We have to have senior civil servants who are not having that dual loyalty. And there are also problems. I don't want to get into the EU Data Retention Directive, which was mentioned earlier, which was round through by Charles Clarke. Lib Dem MEPs opposed it. We do have to look at that ultimately and change that. As Shami says, there are huge problems with that, but let's not focus too much on that. Even before this all blew up recently, a number of us were quite concerned. And at our last Lib Dem Party Congress, I had a large motion on civil liberties, dealing with all sorts of things. You know, the government's done some good things. There's a huge long way to go, and we itemised the things we wanted to see. And Jenny Woods, who it's good to see in the audience, proposed a very detailed amendment saying what we wanted to see in this sort of area, talking about what should not be allowed under any circumstances. If anybody's interested, there are 5 detailed points, which include Data Retention Directive, ensuring that service providers are not mandated by law to collect third-party communications data for non-business purposes by any method, which I hope is broad enough to capture some of this. There's some other points about access. And the coalition agreement is actually very helpful on this. The coalition agreement is quite clear. It's one of the reasons I supported the coalition. On civil liberties, it's very good, the rhetoric. On this, it says it will end the retention of email and phone records without good reason. I haven't yet heard the very good reason that would account for this one. But we do have Home Office capture. And it's something that happens to every Home Secretary as they come in. They possibly start off a bit more liberal, and then they gradually get captured more and more by the security services. Now, these civil liberties issues are absolutely key, but the technical issues are also important. That's why it's so good to have a meeting like this, so that we have to make sure that people understand. I had one conversation with an official where I was told that the political decision should be made before the technical details were quite finalised. But the technical things are there. So one of the things which I'm doing, I've been asked by Nick Clegg, after some conversations, to organise a technical briefing meeting for Lib Dem parliamentarians, special advisors, number 10 people and so forth, to look at the technical aspects. To say it's not the same, Skype is not the same as a phone call. And so we've got some of the people who are speaking today, we've got Google, we've got Facebook, we've got Talk, a whole range of other people. So there starts to be that political buy-in. I hope the Conservatives might think about having something like that so that more Conservatives can understand what's actually going on.
That's a hard task.
Well, there are a few who are open to it, I think, from conversations I've had. More publicly, I'm on the Home Affairs Select Committee, and we've arranged to get Theresa May to come and give evidence to us on Tuesday. That should be live from about 12:30 as a current schedule. One of the things we'll be talking about will be this area. I fear that other things which have gone wrong in the Home Office may mean there are some other questions people want to talk to her about. But we will make sure that this is something, and there are some staff from the Select Committee here to try to understand more of what's going on. Because one of the key things which Gus mentioned is to find out what is actually happening. Not to have this slightly hidden world where there are various stories which nobody can quite confirm, where IFPs are told different stories. We have to know what's happening, and one of the key questions for me will be, Home Secretary, what is actually planned? And I think it's worth saying in that context, Nick Clegg has come up with some better lines, I think more recently than some of the ones that were shown in the previous presentation, but one of the keys is when he announced that any legislation which comes out will be a draft. And that's key, because the Home Office would much rather say, here is the legislation, it's a fait accompli, everybody has to stick to it. Instead we'll have a draft, we'll have hopefully a special committee that will go through the details, and hopefully we'll take evidence from people like this. We'll have a group of MPs and peers who will hopefully learn what the issues actually are. We'll actually know what they are talking about. Because my own belief is that people who know what they're talking about will not want to go ahead with it. And so making sure that happens is really important. One other thing I just want to pick up on before I stop speaking is we're talking a lot today about the issue of how the data is collected, and that is very important. There's also the other side of how the data is accessed. We want to get that side right as well. The current safeguards for access are far too weak. It is far too easy for the police or DWP or a huge range of other agencies to get access to any of this data after it's been collected. We have to make that a much tougher thing. I've been talking about having a magistrate's warrant for any data request. Some sort of safeguards to check that the police can't just go on a fishing expedition. DWP can't look at it all because they think there might be some benefit fraud happening somewhere. Yes, we should investigate benefit fraud, but if they don't have a case that will stand up to a magistrate, they shouldn't be allowed to get access to whatever data it is that we're keeping, however broad that is. I am absolutely committed to protecting the civil liberties through all of these issues, and I and the Liberal Democrats will be making sure that we stop the ever-encroaching drive to an authoritarian state.